The mountain stood tall against the night sky, its sharp edges cutting through the clouds. Snow fell heavily, covering everything in white silence. Deep inside a hidden cave, an alien mother held her small child close to her chest. The cave was cold, darker than the space between stars, and the sound of the wind outside was like the howl of a hungry beast. The mother pressed her arms around the child, trying to give warmth, but her body was weak. They had been trapped here since the storm began, and no food had touched their lips for many days. The alien child was small, fragile, and his faint glow, the natural light of his kind, was growing dim. His breathing came in soft whispers, and his eyes, once bright with curiosity, now closed again and again as if sleep could carry him away forever. The mother shook him gently, whispering words in her strange language, words of comfort that even she no longer believed. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but her pain did not matter. What mattered was the child in her arms. She had promised him safety, but now, in this cold cave, she feared she had failed. The walls of the cave dripped with water. Every drop echoed, making the silence heavier. The floor was hard stone, and sharp rocks pressed against their bodies as they tried to rest. The air smelled of damp earth, and each breath was icy, cutting through their throats. The mother looked at the cave's mouth, blocked by snow and fallen rocks. No light entered except for a thin crack where the wind screamed through. That scream carried her fears. She knew no one could hear them, and no one would come. The child stirred and gave a weak cry. It was not the cry of life, but the sound of despair. The mother's heart ached, and she pressed her lips against his forehead, which was cold like stone. She had no food to give, no fire to light, no way out. She thought of her home planet, the skies filled with silver rings and shining waters. She thought of the child's father, left behind in the war. She thought of the promise she had made, to keep the boy alive no matter what. Now the promise was breaking like glass in her hands. Hours passed. The storm outside did not rest. The cave grew colder, the night darker. The mother's mind filled with shadows. She imagined the cave becoming their grave, their bodies frozen together until time itself forgot them. She pulled the child closer, as if her warmth could fight death itself. But her strength was leaving. Her eyelids grew heavy, her body shook. Still, she refused to close her eyes. If she slept, the boy might not wake. The child whispered one word in their language: water. The mother's eyes filled with tears. She searched the cave with desperate hands, scraping against the stone. She found only small drops sliding down the walls. She cupped her hand, caught the cold liquid, and brought it to the boy's lips. He drank with trembling mouth, then fell silent again. It was not enough, but it was something. She prayed silently, not to gods, but to the stars that had carried her to this world. Time lost meaning. Every minute was pain. Every breath was a struggle. The mother leaned against the wall, rocking the child slowly, humming a song from her world. Her voice was broken, but the tune carried love. It was the only warmth left in the cave, the warmth of her heart. Outside, the mountain roared with thunder. Far away, no one knew of the alien mother and her child. No one cared. Yet fate had strange plans. The storm carried the child's faint cry through the cracks of the stone, pushing it into the open air. The sound was small, almost lost in the wind. But sometimes even the smallest sound can change everything. The mother did not know this. She only closed her eyes for a moment, holding her child tighter, whispering, "Stay alive. Just stay alive." And in that cold cave, where all hope seemed dead, destiny was already moving. Somewhere in the distance, footsteps pressed against the snow. A human wandered in the storm, unaware that his life, and the fate of two lost souls, was about to change forever. The storm had not rested. Snow poured from the sky like endless sheets of white. The mountain was alive with wind, screaming through trees and tearing at rocks. Somewhere along the edge of a steep trail, a lone human man walked slowly, his heavy boots sinking deep into the snow. His name was Daniel, a traveler and climber who loved the silence of mountains. But this night was different. This night the silence felt strange. like the mountain was hiding a secret. Daniel pulled his jacket tighter against the cold. His breath came out in clouds that vanished into the darkness. The path ahead was slippery, and one wrong step could throw him into the canyon below. Yet he kept going, searching for a small cabin he had planned to reach before nightfall. Every step echoed in the emptiness. Every sound of the storm made him tighten his grip on his flashlight. Then he stopped. Something cut through the howl of the wind. A sound so small, so weak that at first he thought his mind was playing tricks. He held his breath. The storm raged, trees bent, but under it all he heard it again. A cry. It was not the cry of an animal. It was not the crack of ice. It was softer, thinner, like the voice of a child carried by the wind. Daniel frowned. "Impossible," he whispered. "No one should be out here, not in this storm, not in this deadly cold." He turned his head, listening carefully. The sound came from the left side of the path, where sharp rocks rose like black teeth. He moved closer. His boots crunched over the snow, and his flashlight beam cut across the stone. There was nothing at first, only white drifts and shadows. The sound faded. For a moment he thought he had imagined it. Then there it was again. A short, broken cry, full of pain. Daniel's heart beat faster. Somewhere inside him he knew this was real. He felt fear, but also something stronger. The pull to find whoever was in trouble. He could not just walk away. He climbed carefully toward the rocks, the wind pushing against his back. Snow slipped under his boots, and twice he almost fell. At last he found a narrow crack in the mountain wall. Cold air blasted out from it, carrying with it that same faint cry. Daniel leaned closer, shining his flashlight inside. The cave stretched into darkness, but near the entrance he saw movement. Two shapes curled together on the stone floor. At first he thought they were people, lost travelers like himself. But as his light touched them, his breath caught in shock. The shapes were not human. One was tall, thin, with long arms wrapped around the smaller one. Their skin shimmered faintly, almost glowing in the dark. Their faces were not like any he had seen, with strange ridges and eyes that reflected the light like mirrors. The smaller one stirred weakly, giving another faint cry, the same cry he had heard through the storm. Daniel froze. His hand shook as he held the flashlight. Fear rushed through him. These were not people. They were something else. His mind whispered one word he had only read in stories: aliens. The taller figure, the mother, lifted her head. Her eyes locked onto his. They were sharp, filled with fear and warning. She pulled the child closer to her chest, shielding him, her body trembling not just from cold but from terror. For a long moment no one moved. Only the storm filled the silence. Daniel stood outside, heart pounding, caught between two choices. He could run, pretend he never saw them, escape the danger. Or he could step forward. The cry of the child came again, softer now, weaker. It pierced through his fear. It did not matter that they were alien. A child was dying in front of him. Daniel swallowed hard. Slowly, carefully, he lowered the flashlight so it would not blind them. His other hand reached into his backpack. He pulled out a water bottle and a wrapped piece of bread. He held them out, not stepping inside yet, only showing. His voice, steady but gentle, broke the silence. "I don't know what you are," he said softly, "but I can help." The mother stared at him, not moving, her eyes filled with suspicion. The child whimpered again. Her grip tightened, torn between fear and hope. Daniel stayed still, his arm outstretched, the storm biting at his back. The moment stretched forever. Then slowly the mother loosened her hold. She leaned forward, just enough to let the child's eyes open toward the light. The boy's gaze met Daniel's, weak but alive. Something shifted in the cave. The fear did not vanish, but a small bridge had formed. A silent question hung between them. Could they trust this human? Daniel felt his heart steady. He knew the answer had to be yes, because in that cold cave in the middle of the deadly storm he had already made his choice. He would not leave them behind. And so the mountain night, filled with danger and darkness, became the beginning of something far greater, a story no one would believe, where the fate of two alien lives rested in the hands of one human. Daniel stood at the mouth of the cave, snow swirling behind him like white smoke. His flashlight beam stretched across the stone floor, landing on the two strange beings inside. His heart beat so loud he thought the sound would echo off the rocks. Every story he had ever read about creatures from other worlds rushed into his mind, but nothing could prepare him for this moment. The taller one, the mother, held the small child tightly. Her body trembled not only from the cold but from fear. Her eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the light like pools of silver. She was not human, yet Daniel could see something he recognized in her gaze. Desperation. The child in her arms gave another soft cry, too weak to be the cry of strength. It was the sound of life fading. Daniel slowly lowered his flashlight, careful not to blind them. His hands were shaking, but he forced himself to stay calm. He raised the bottle of water and the piece of bread again. "It's food," he whispered, his voice almost lost under the wind outside. "It's safe." The mother tilted her head, studying him. Her breath came out in short gasps, mist forming in the cold air. She shifted her body so the child was hidden behind her arms, shielding him. Her instincts screamed danger. This human was unknown, his tools strange, his smell unfamiliar. But her child stirred in hunger, and his dim light grew weaker with every passing moment. Daniel knew she did not understand his words. Words did not matter now. He crouched down, making himself small, showing he was not a threat. He placed the bread carefully on a flat rock near the entrance and pushed the bottle of water beside it. Then slowly he stepped back. The cave was silent except for the drip of water and the faint cry of the child. The mother's eyes stayed locked on him. Her body did not move. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the child stirred again, reaching with a tiny hand. His soft glow flickered, pulling at the mother's heart. She could not watch him suffer any longer. With slow, trembling hands, she reached out. She pulled the bread closer, sniffed it, studied it with suspicion. It was unlike any food she had known. Still, she tore a small piece and pressed it against the child's mouth. The boy took it weakly, chewing as if every bite was heavy. Then Daniel saw it, a change in the glow. The faint light on the child's skin brightened slightly. It was small, but it was hope. The mother froze, staring at the boy, then at Daniel. Her silver eyes softened just a little. Daniel felt a weight lift from his chest. He let out a shaky breath. For the first time since he had seen them, he believed they might trust him, but trust was fragile. When Daniel took one step forward, the mother hissed, a low sound that echoed in the cave. She raised her hand as if to warn him. He stopped immediately, raising his palms to show he meant no harm. His heart pounded, but he did not turn away. "I won't hurt you," he whispered, though he knew she could not understand. The child's breathing steadied, soft but stronger than before. The mother looked at Daniel again, her face torn between fear and gratitude. She lowered her hand, but did not move closer. Instead, she adjusted her grip on the child, pulling the thermal blanket tighter around his fragile body. Daniel sat down at the edge of the cave, his back against the wall. He placed the flashlight on the ground so it lit the space gently instead of sharply. The shadows became softer, less threatening. He wanted her to see that he was not going to leave, not going to harm them, but also not going to force anything. Outside, the storm screamed louder, shaking the mountain. The wind pushed snow into the cave's opening, and the cold air bit harder. Daniel glanced at the narrow entrance, then back at the mother and child. They would not survive another night in this place. He knew he had to get them out, but first he had to earn their trust. The mother rocked the child gently, her strange lullaby filling the cave. It was not like any song Daniel had heard, but the tone was familiar, the sound of love. It made him forget for a moment that they were alien, that their bodies were not like his. All he saw was a mother and her child fighting to survive. Daniel's eyes softened. He whispered more to himself than to them. "You're just like us, aren't you? Just trying to live." The mother looked at him again, her gaze steady. She could not understand his words, but she felt something in his voice. Something calm, something honest. For the first time, she did not look away. The storm raged on outside, but inside the cave, something fragile began to form. The first thread of trust. A silent agreement hung in the air. The human would not leave, and the alien mother would not push him away. In that cold and forgotten cave, on a mountain no map had marked, two worlds touched for the very first time. Not with weapons or fear, but with bread, water, and a child's fading cry. And though none of them knew it yet, this small moment of first contact would change everything. The storm outside refused to rest. Snow slammed against the mountain with a force that shook the rocks, and icy wind screamed through every crack. Inside the cave, Daniel sat quietly near the entrance, his back pressed against the stone. Across from him, the alien mother held her child close, her glowing eyes watching him like a hawk. The bread and water had given the child a little strength. His glow had grown brighter, though still faint. He now rested against his mother's chest, breathing softly. The mother hummed a strange lullaby, her voice trembling but full of love. Every sound echoed through the cold cave, mixing with the distant roar of the storm. Daniel pulled another item from his backpack, a silver thermal blanket. He shook it open, the metallic fabric rustling loudly. The mother tensed instantly. Her body stiffened and her arms tightened around the child. She thought it was some kind of weapon. Daniel noticed her fear and quickly spread the blanket across his own shoulders, pulling it around himself. "See? Warm," he said softly, his voice calm. He pointed at the mother and child, then at the blanket, then pressed his hands against his chest to show comfort. The mother did not move. Her eyes narrowed, suspicious. Yet the cold was biting deeper into the cave, and the child shivered again. The glow dimmed and his tiny body curled tighter. The mother's heart ached. She hesitated, then slowly loosened her grip. With one arm still holding her son, she reached out and touched the blanket Daniel offered. It was warm, far warmer than her thin covering. Her eyes widened slightly. Carefully, she pulled it around her child first, wrapping him like a fragile flame that needed protection. Only then did she drape part of it across herself. Daniel exhaled in relief. A step forward. A fragile thread of trust. Hours passed. The storm outside kept them trapped, and the cave seemed to shrink with every sound of thunder. Daniel tried to speak, not because he thought she would understand, but because silence felt heavy. He told her about his journey, about how he loved the mountains, about the small cabin where he had planned to stay. His words filled the cave with warmth that his body alone could not give. The mother listened, not understanding the meaning, but she felt the tone. His voice was steady, not sharp or cruel. For the first time, she let her eyes soften when they met his, but danger was not gone. The cave shook suddenly. A crack of stone echoed above them, and small rocks tumbled down from the ceiling. The child cried, and the mother clutched him tightly. Daniel jumped up, flashing his light toward the cave walls. He saw loose rocks shifting, the storm forcing them to break apart. If the ceiling collapsed, they would all be buried alive. "We can't stay here," Daniel whispered to himself. His eyes moved back to the mother. She was already on edge, her breathing quick, her body ready to defend her child. He pointed toward the cave entrance, then made a walking motion with his fingers. He pointed at her, then at himself, showing they must leave. The mother shook her head violently. Outside was danger. The storm, the snow, the mountain's sharp cliffs, it was death. She pulled her child closer, her eyes hard again. She would rather face the collapsing cave than step into the wild storm with a stranger. Daniel's mind raced. How could he convince her? He pulled out a rope from his pack and tied it around his waist. Then he looped the other end and placed it on the ground, pushing it toward her. He pointed again at the entrance, then tapped his chest and spread his arms wide. "I will lead. I will not let you fall." The mother looked at the rope, then at him. Her child stirred again, his glow weaker than before. She knew he would not survive if they stayed in this frozen tomb. Her fear was strong, but her love was stronger. At last she nodded once. A small, sharp nod that meant agreement. Daniel's heart jumped with relief. He smiled just a little before pulling his backpack tight. He moved toward the entrance, the rope tied firmly. The mother wrapped the rope around her waist and held her child close. Her steps were uncertain, her eyes still full of suspicion, but she followed. The wind struck them the moment they reached the opening. Snow lashed at their faces, sharp as glass. The mountain roared, daring them to step into its jaws. The child whimpered, and the mother bent low to shield him with her body. Daniel planted his boots in the snow, holding the rope tight, and shouted over the storm, "Stay close!" Of course, she did not understand the words, but she understood his actions. Together, human and alien stood on the edge of survival. Behind them was the cave, ready to collapse. Before them was the storm, ready to swallow them whole. It was a fragile moment, a thin line between life and death. Trust hung in the balance, thin as the rope that now tied their worlds together. And with one final breath, they stepped into the blizzard. Snow whipped across the mountain like a living beast. The storm howled, shaking trees and breaking branches while the path below them vanished under white layers of ice. Daniel stood at the front, rope tied firmly around his waist. Behind him, the alien mother clutched her child, the rope wrapped around her too. Their glowing eyes looked uncertain in the stormlight, but they had agreed to follow. The cave behind them cracked again. A large stone rolled down, smashing against the frozen ground. Daniel didn't look back. He knew they had no choice now. The cave would not last another hour. Survival meant moving forward. He tightened his gloves and leaned close to the wind. "We'll take it slow," he whispered, though the storm swallowed his voice. He pointed down the narrow trail, his other hand gripping the rope. The mother's eyes followed his gestures. She nodded, though her body trembled from fear and cold. Step by step they moved. The mountain path was thin, no wider than Daniel's arm span. On one side, the rock wall rose like a black tower. On the other, the land fell away into nothingness. A single slip would mean death. The storm pushed hard, trying to throw them into the abyss. Snow covered their footprints as soon as they made them, erasing their progress like the mountain itself wanted them lost. The child whimpered, his weak glow dimming in the cold. The mother tightened the blanket around him, whispering softly in her alien tongue. Her words were filled with love, but her eyes were full of fear. Every gust of wind threatened to steal her balance. Daniel looked back often, raising his hand to signal when to stop, when to move. He knew this mountain like his own skin. He had climbed it before, though never in such a storm. His mind raced, calculating every step, every chance of danger. At one narrow turn, he pressed himself flat against the rock and stretched his hand back toward her. She hesitated. To touch a human was against every instinct, every warning that lived in her blood. But the cliff below growled like a hungry mouth. She had no choice. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. His gloves were rough, but his grip was strong enough to steady her and her child. They made it across, one heartbeat at a time. Minutes felt like hours. Each step was a battle against the mountain. The rope pulled tight, holding them together. Daniel slipped once, his boot sliding across ice, but he caught himself with his axe, his muscles straining until the danger passed. The mother gasped, pulling her child close. Daniel forced a small nod, trying to show her it was under control. But the storm grew worse. Snow fell thicker, covering the trail completely. Visibility shrank until the world was only white and shadows. Daniel stopped, his eyes searching. His memory told him there should be a narrow ledge to the left, a safer path that curved downward. But in this storm, even memory could betray him. He dropped to one knee, brushing snow away with his gloves until stone showed. Yes, there it was. The ledge. He pointed, then crawled onto it, guiding the rope. The mother followed, holding her child tight against her chest. The ledge was slippery, but lower, shielded from the worst of the wind. For a moment, they could breathe. The child opened his eyes, his small glow flickering weakly. Daniel saw it and knew they were running out of time. The boy needed warmth, real shelter, or he would not survive the night. He reached into his pack, pulling out another energy bar, then broke it in half. He placed one piece on the rock and handed the other toward the mother. She hesitated, then accepted, breaking it again to feed her son first. Daniel watched the boy chew slowly. His glow brightened again, faint but visible. Daniel felt relief wash over him. They still had a chance, but survival was not simple. A low rumble rolled across the mountain. Daniel froze. His ears caught it, the sound of snow shifting above. His eyes snapped upward. Avalanche! Move! He shouted, though they could not understand the word. His body said everything. He grabbed the rope, pulling them forward, forcing speed on the narrow path. The mother clutched her child tightly, her steps stumbling but desperate. The rumble grew louder, the mountain roaring as snow broke loose. White waves rolled down from above, crushing trees, smashing rocks. Daniel's heart pounded. He pulled with all his strength, leading them toward a narrow hollow under an overhang. It was the only chance. They dove inside just as the avalanche crashed past. Snow thundered down, shaking the ground. The cave shook like the breath of a giant beast. The air filled with icy powder, choking, blinding. The child cried, muffled against his mother's chest. Daniel pressed his body over them, shielding them with his back. The snow slammed past, but the hollow held. Minutes later, the sound faded, leaving only silence. Daniel collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. His body trembled with exhaustion. He looked at the mother. Her eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, fixed on him. She had seen him shield them, risking his life for hers and her child's. For the first time, she lowered her head slightly, a gesture not of fear but of respect. Daniel closed his eyes, catching his breath. They were still alive, but the mountain was not finished with them. He knew the hardest part was yet to come. The escape had only begun. The hollow shook long after the avalanche had passed. Snow piled at the entrance and icy powder floated in the air like mist. Daniel lay on the ground, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. His arms trembled with exhaustion, but his grip on the rope never loosened. He turned his head and looked at the alien mother. She sat pressed against the wall, her child still wrapped in the blanket, glowing faintly in her arms. Her eyes glimmered in the dim light, watching him with a mix of fear and something new, something closer to trust. The silence did not last. Another rumble echoed above, softer at first, then louder. Daniel's eyes widened. The mountain was not finished. The avalanche had only loosened more snow. The ground vibrated again and a new roar rolled across the cliffs. Daniel cursed under his breath. Not again. He scrambled to his knees, signaling frantically with his hands. He pointed at the mother, then at the narrow exit on the other side of the hollow. She understood, clutching her child tighter. She was weak, but her instincts as a mother pushed her to obey. They stumbled into the storm once more. The rope held them together as they moved across the broken path. Snow crunched and shifted under their boots, threatening to drag them down. Behind them, the roar grew louder, a monstrous growl that swallowed every other sound. Daniel looked back. His heart skipped. Another wall of snow was racing down the mountain, bigger than the first. It smashed through trees, sent boulders flying, and rolled faster with every second. "Run," Daniel shouted, though he knew she could not understand. His actions spoke louder. He pulled on the rope, forcing his legs forward, stumbling across the uneven path. The mother followed, her child pressed close to her chest, her eyes wide with terror. The mountain became chaos. The wind screamed, the snow roared, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. Every step was a fight. The avalanche was faster, hungrier. The trail ahead ended at a steep slope half covered in ice. Daniel did not stop to think. He grabbed his rope, looped it around a rock, and shouted back, pointing downward. They had to slide. It was the only way. The mother hesitated. Sliding down an icy slope with her child in her arms looked like death. But the avalanche behind them promised worse. Daniel didn't wait. He threw himself forward, sliding down with his axe, digging into the ice to slow him. Snow sprayed into his face, cold burning his skin. He reached the bottom with a heavy thud, coughing but alive. He turned and waved frantically. "Now!" The mother clutched her child tighter, wrapped the blanket firmly, and pushed off the edge. She slid down, her body twisting as she tried to shield the boy. The rope pulled taut, and Daniel braced himself, digging his boots into the ground. The sudden weight nearly dragged him backward, but he held firm, muscles straining until she reached the bottom safely. For 1 second, there was relief. Then the avalanche hit. The wall of snow slammed down the slope, crashing toward them like a tidal wave. Daniel's eyes widened. He grabbed the mother's arm, shouting with all his strength, and pulled her toward a cluster of boulders. They stumbled behind it, pressing their bodies against the stone as the avalanche thundered past. Snow exploded around them, blinding, suffocating. The air turned heavy, pressing into their lungs. Daniel threw himself over the mother and child, his back against the storm. The weight of snow slammed into him, nearly burying them alive. He pushed, clawed, and fought to stay above it, his body screaming in pain. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the roar faded, leaving a deadly silence. Daniel gasped, pulling his head free from the snow. He coughed, his throat raw, and dug furiously with his hands until the mother's face appeared. She was alive, her eyes wide with shock, her arms still locked around her child. The boy's glow flickered faintly, weaker but still there. Daniel's chest heaved with relief. He had shielded them again, and though his body ached, they were alive. The mother looked at him in silence. Her breathing was heavy, but her eyes softened in a way they never had before. She reached out one trembling hand and touched his arm. It was not a gesture of fear. It was thanks. Daniel blinked, surprised, then gave a small nod. He didn't need words. He understood, but survival was far from over. Snow now blocked the path behind them, cutting off any return. The storm still raged above, and the mountain loomed like a predator waiting for its chance. Daniel looked at the sky. Night was falling fast. They needed shelter, real shelter, or the child's dim glow would vanish forever. He tightened the rope, pulling them close. "We move," he whispered, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "We keep moving." The mother did not understand his language, but she understood his eyes, his hands, his urgency. She nodded once, clutching her child tighter. Together, tied by rope and fate, they stepped back into the storm. The mountain had tried to bury them, but they were not finished yet. And as Daniel led them forward into the blizzard, the thought burned in his chest. He was no longer just saving strangers. He was carrying lives that now depended entirely on him. The storm slowly weakened as the long night passed, but the mountain remained cruel. Daniel's legs burned with every step, and his breath came in sharp clouds that froze on his beard. The rope tied him to the alien mother, and she held her child tightly against her chest. The boy's glow was faint now, like the last flicker of a dying flame. Daniel's mind screamed at him to stop, to rest, but his heart refused. Each time he looked back and saw the mother's silver eyes full of fear. Each time he heard the child's weak breathing, he found new strength. He had carried heavy packs before, but tonight he carried something greater. 2 lives that did not belong to his world, yet now belonged to his care. The trail widened, and through the thinning snow Daniel finally saw it, the faint outline of roofs far below. A village sat at the mountain's base, lights glowing warmly against the dark. Relief rushed through him, but he knew the hardest part was still ahead. The slope was steep and the path narrow. One mistake could end everything. "Hold on," he whispered, gripping the rope. He began the descent, planting his boots carefully, cutting steps into the ice with his axe. The mother followed, clutching her child so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. She was exhausted, but she matched Daniel's pace, her love stronger than her weakness. Halfway down, the child stirred and gave a faint cry. The sound was so small that Daniel almost missed it, but it pierced his heart. He turned, and in the glow of his flashlight he saw the boy's eyes half closed, his light nearly gone. No more waiting, no more careful steps. Daniel unhooked the rope, swung it across his shoulders, and turned to the mother. He pointed at himself, then at the child. He opened his arms wide. She froze, her eyes sharp with suspicion. To hand over her child to a human felt impossible, but the boy was slipping away in her arms, and Daniel's eyes burned with determination, not cruelty. In that moment she understood. With trembling hands she placed her child into his arms. Daniel pulled the boy close, wrapping him in his jacket. He could feel the small body shaking, the glow almost gone. His chest tightened. He would not let the boy die. "Not now. Stay with me, little one," he whispered. He tightened the straps of his pack, slung the rope around both mother and child, and began moving faster. His boots slid, his axe struck into ice, his muscles screamed with every motion. The storm clawed at him, but he pushed forward step by step down the deadly slope. At last his boots hit the flat ground near the base. The village lights were clearer now, warm and golden. He turned to the mother, still tied to the rope, her body bent with exhaustion. She stumbled, nearly falling, but Daniel pulled her forward, one arm holding the child, the other dragging her to safety. Snow crunched louder as he neared the first house. Dogs barked in the distance, and soon human figures appeared in the light, shouting in surprise. Villagers rushed forward, their eyes widening as they saw the strange group stumbling out of the storm. "What is that?" Someone cried, "Aliens?" Another voice gasped, "Stay back." A man shouted, fear in his tone. The mother shrank back, clutching at Daniel's arm. Her body shook, not from cold but from fear of these new humans. She had trusted one, but could she trust them all? Daniel stood firm. He stepped forward, his voice sharp but steady. "They're alive because I brought them here. They need help, food, warmth, don't turn them away." The villagers hesitated. Some stepped back, afraid of the glowing child. Others whispered, unsure if they should trust. But then the boy gave a faint cry, so weak it barely carried through the air. The sound cut through the fear. Mothers in the crowd clutched their own children, their hearts stirred. One woman stepped forward with a blanket. She placed it gently over the alien mother's shoulders, her eyes soft. Another man brought hot water. Slowly, the crowd's fear turned into silence, and silence turned into compassion. The mother's silver eyes filled with tears. She turned to Daniel. Her lips trembled, and though her words were broken by her strange language, he understood the meaning. "You saved us," she whispered. Daniel swallowed hard. His arms still held the boy, whose glow brightened slightly in the warmth. Relief washed over him like fire against ice. He had done it. Against the mountain, against the storm, against every impossible chance, he had carried them here. The villagers guided them inside, offering fire and food. Daniel lowered himself onto a chair, his body finally giving in to exhaustion. The child stirred in his arms, blinking weakly alive. The mother sat beside him, her eyes never leaving her son. For the first time, she allowed herself to breathe. Outside, the storm howled one last time before fading into silence. The mountain had failed to bury them, and in that small village, under the warm glow of firelight, a miracle had happened. Not of machines or weapons, not of science or power, but of heart. A human heart that refused to give up.